3 months passed, and Cole Hadley had become the most talked-about person in the Imperial Palace. Not because he had done anything dramatic, not because he had challenged anyone, or made demands, or caused a scene. He was talked about because no one could figure him out. The Velithi were a species built on power. Their entire civilization ran on dominance, fear, and the careful management of threats. Every person in the palace, from the lowest servant to the Empress herself, understood the world through one simple question: who is stronger than me, and who is weaker? It was how they decided who to obey, who to ignore, and who to crush. Cole did not fit into that system. He was clearly weak by Velithi standards. He was small, soft, had no claws, no natural armor, and could not survive more than a few seconds in a fight with even the weakest Velithi guard. By every measure they used, he should have been invisible, a piece of furniture in the palace that everyone stepped around without noticing. But people noticed Cole. They noticed him because he talked to everyone, not just the nobles and the generals and the diplomats. He talked to the servants who cleaned the floors. He talked to the cooks in the kitchen. He talked to the guards who stood at their posts for 12-hour shifts with nothing to do but stare at walls. He asked them their names. He asked about their families. He remembered what they told him and asked follow-up questions the next time he saw them. It was such a small thing, such a human thing, and it was driving the palace quietly insane. Aethera first noticed the change in a guard named Drothan. He was a large, mean-tempered soldier who had been assigned to patrol the eastern wing, and he had made a habit of shoving human servants out of his way as he walked. The human staff that Nythara had allowed Cole to bring were terrified of him. One morning, Aethera saw Drothan step aside to let a human servant pass. Not just step aside, but nod at her, almost politely. Aethera stopped in the corridor and stared. That evening, she asked Cole about it. "Oh, Drothan," Cole said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Yeah, we have been talking. Did you know his daughter is sick? Some kind of bone condition. He has been working double shifts to pay for her treatment, and nobody in the palace has ever asked him how he is doing. He is not mean. He is exhausted and scared." "You learned all of that from talking to him?" "I learned all of that from listening to him," Cole corrected gently. "There is a difference." Aethera sat with that for a long time. The changes were small at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence. A courtier named Lady Savara, who had been openly plotting to have Aethera removed from the palace, suddenly withdrew her scheme and apologized publicly. She wept as she did it, which was unheard of in Velithi court. An intelligence officer named Brecthen, known for his cruelty during interrogations, requested a transfer to a research post. He told his commander he could no longer stomach what he had been doing. Every single one of them had one thing in common. They had recently had a conversation with Cole Hadley. Aethera confronted him about it in the palace gardens, a vast space filled with plants that glowed soft violet and hummed with a low, musical frequency. It was one of the few places in the palace where they could speak without being monitored. "What are you doing to these people?" she demanded. Cole looked at her with genuine confusion. "I am not doing anything to them. I am just talking to them." "People do not change like this from a conversation, Cole." "Sure they do," he said. "People change all the time. They just need someone to give them permission." "Permission to do what?" "To be honest with themselves." Aethera paced among the glowing plants, her boots crunching on the gravel path. "My mother's intelligence network has noticed. They are watching you more closely now. They think you are running some kind of human psychological operation. I am having coffee with people and asking how their day is going. That is what worries them." Cole laughed. It was a warm, full sound that echoed through the garden, and Aethera caught herself smiling before she could stop it. She turned away so he would not see, but she could not hide forever, and Cole was observant in ways that continued to surprise her. He noticed the small things. When she was anxious, she rubbed the ridges along the back of her left hand. When she was thinking hard, she tilted her head to the right. When she was pretending to be fine, but was not, her voice dropped half a tone. "You are scared," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I am not scared. I am concerned." "Aethera, you are scared, and that is okay." She turned to face him. In the violet light of the garden, his dark eyes looked almost luminous. He was so small next to her, so fragile, and yet he was the most solid thing in her world. "My mother summoned me yesterday," she said. "She is not happy. The passive resistance on Earth has not stopped. Your people are still refusing to fully submit." "Good," Cole said. "It is not good. She told me that if this marriage does not produce results, we will both be eliminated." That is the word she used, eliminated. Cole did not flinch. He stood very still for a moment, and then he asked a question that changed everything. "Tell me about the Rethkai." The Rethkai. The name sent a cold spike down Aethera's spine. Every Valithi child grew up hearing stories about the Rethkai Federation, the one power in the galaxy that the Dominion had never conquered. They were the monster under the bed, the enemy that never went away, no matter how many fleets were sent against them. "Why do you want to know about the Rethkai?" she asked. "Because your mother is not really angry about humans," Cole said. "We are too small to matter that much. She is angry because the situation with us is making her look weak, and she cannot afford to look weak right now. Something is happening with the Rethkai, and we are caught in the middle of it." Aethera stared at him. He was right. There had been increased military activity along the Rethkai border for months. Intelligence reports that she was not supposed to have read suggested that the Rethkai were testing the Dominion's defenses, probing for weakness. Her mother was under more pressure than she had been in decades. "How did you figure that out?" Aethera asked. "I pay attention," Cole said simply, "and I ask the right questions of the right people." The servants. The servants, the guards, the minor officials, the people everyone ignores because they think they are not important. They are the ones who actually know what is going on, because nobody bothers to hide things from them. Aethera felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not literally, though on Valith Prime that was always a possibility. She felt it in her understanding of the man she had married. Cole Hadley was not a pet. He was not a fool. He was not even just a good diplomat. He was something the Valithi had no word for. Someone who saw the whole picture, not through intelligence reports or spy networks, but through the simple act of caring enough to listen to the people everyone else overlooked. "You are more dangerous than they think you are," Aethera said softly. "I am not dangerous at all," Cole said. "I am just paying attention. The dangerous ones are the people who refuse to." That night, Aethera made a decision. She had spent her whole life surviving in her mother's court by being invisible, by keeping her head down and her opinions hidden. But Cole had shown her something she had not considered before. There was another kind of strength, not the strength of claws and warships and fear, the strength of seeing people clearly and choosing to help them anyway. She began feeding Cole information. Not secrets, not military intelligence, but context. The names of allies and enemies within the court. The history of the Dominion's failed campaigns against the Rethkai. The unspoken rules that governed Valithi politics. She became his teacher, and in return, he became hers. He taught her about Earth, about the oceans and the forests and the mountains, about the way humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, and then somehow always finding a reason to come back together, about a concept called forgiveness that had no equivalent in the Valithi language. "It means choosing not to punish someone for what they have done," Cole explained one evening over dinner. "That is weakness," Aethera said automatically. Is it? Cole asked. Or is it the hardest thing a person can do? She thought about that for a long time after he had fallen asleep. She watched him in the pale moonlight. This small, soft man who had walked into the heart of an alien empire with nothing but a bag of books and a thermos of coffee. And she wondered if she was falling in love with him or simply waking up for the first time in her life. She suspected it was both. Meanwhile, the servants in the eastern wing had begun to smile. The guards were less rough. The hallways felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight was being lifted one small conversation at a time. And in the intelligence offices deep within the palace, analysts stared at their reports and tried to understand how one human with no weapons, no power, and no authority was slowly and quietly changing the texture of the most feared empire in the galaxy. They could not figure it out, and that scared them more than any weapon ever could. 6 months after the wedding, the HFY struck. 3 Veolithi border stations were destroyed in a single coordinated attack. The explosions lit up the void between star systems and sent shockwaves through the Dominion's military command. Within hours, every war fleet in the Empire was placed on high alert. Within a day, the Imperial Palace was a hive of fury and fear. Nithara convened an emergency session of the Military Council in the War Chamber, a massive room deep beneath the palace, where the walls were lined with tactical screens showing the positions of every Dominion ship in the galaxy. The room was full of generals and admirals, each one taller and more heavily armored than the last, their voices booming off the stone walls as they argued about how to respond. The answer, as always, was the same. Hit them back. Hit them harder. Burn their worlds. Make them regret ever daring to challenge the Dominion. Cole was brought to the chamber. Brought. A guard escorted him to a small, low chair at the edge of the room, positioned so he had to crane his neck to see the generals above him. It was designed to make him feel small. Ithera stood behind her mother's seat, her hands clenched at her sides, watching everything. For 2 hours, Cole listened to the generals shout. He listened to their plans for retaliation, their estimates of enemy strength, their projections of how long the campaign would take. He listened to them talk about acceptable losses, about how many ships they were willing to sacrifice, about which of their own colonies could be abandoned to free up resources for the assault. Nobody asked about the people on those colonies. When there was finally a break in the arguments, Cole raised his hand. The room did not go quiet out of respect. It went quiet because every Veolithi in the room was shocked that the human had the nerve to draw attention to himself. "May I say something?" Cole asked. Nithara looked down at him from her elevated seat. Her expression was unreadable. "Speak," she said. "The 3 stations that were destroyed," Cole said. "Were there any casualties?" A murmur ran through the room. One of the generals, a scarred veteran named Thrask, leaned forward. "The stations were destroyed. That is what matters." "But were the people on them killed?" Cole pressed. The room shifted uncomfortably. An intelligence officer near the back pulled up a report and hesitated before reading it. The stations were evacuated approximately 2 hours before the attacks. Automated distress signals were triggered, but all personnel had already been moved to emergency transport ships. Silence. Cole nodded slowly. So the HFY destroyed 3 empty stations. They made a lot of noise and caused a lot of damage, but they did not kill anyone. "What is your point, human?" Thrask growled. "My point is that if the HFY wanted to kill people, they could have. They chose not to. They did not attack your stations to start a war. They attacked them to get your attention." The generals erupted. Several of them stood, shouting that the human was naive, that he understood nothing about warfare, or the HFY, or the realities of galactic power. Thrask slammed his fist on the table, hard enough to crack it, and called Cole a fool. Cole sat in his small chair and waited for the noise to die down. When it did, he spoke again. How many wars has the Dominion won against the Rethkai Federation? The silence that followed was the loudest thing Aethera had ever heard. The answer was none. In 3 centuries of conflict, the Vailihi had never beaten the Rethkai. Every war ended the same way, in exhaustion, withdrawal, and a few decades of tense peace before the next round of violence. And every time, Cole continued, the strategy has been the same. Overwhelming force, total destruction, the biggest fleet, the heaviest weapons, the most aggressive assault. And every time, the result has been the same. You dare lecture us on military strategy? Thrask snarled. I am not lecturing anyone. I am asking a simple question. If doing the same thing has not worked in 300 years, is it possible that a different approach might be worth trying? Nithara raised her hand, and the room went still. She studied Cole with those ancient, calculating eyes. Aethera knew that look. It was the look of a predator evaluating something new, deciding whether it was food or a threat. What would you suggest? The Empress asked. Let me go to the border, Cole said. Let me talk to them. The laughter came from everywhere at once. Generals, admirals, advisors, even the guards along the walls. The sound bounced off the stone and filled the chamber like a wave. Cole sat through it without moving. But Nithara did not laugh. She waited until the noise faded, then said, You believe you can accomplish what our finest commanders have failed to do for 3 centuries? I believe I can have a conversation, Cole said, which is something your finest commanders have never tried. Aethera felt her heart stop. She willed Cole to stop talking, to sit back down, to not push the most powerful being in the galaxy any further. But Cole held Nithara's gaze with a steadiness that should have been impossible for someone in his position. Very well, Nithara said. Go to the border. And when you fail, you will have proven that your species has nothing of value to offer this dominion. And if I do not fail? Cole asked. Nithara's eyes narrowed. Then we will have a very different conversation, you and I. Cole nodded. I can live with that. Aethera caught him in the corridor outside the war chamber. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into an alcove, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and terror. Do you understand what you just did? She hissed. You just volunteered to walk into Rethkai space alone. They will kill you. They evacuated those stations, Aethera. Every single person was moved to safety before the attacks hit. The Rethkai went to enormous trouble to make sure nobody died. That is not what an enemy does when they want war. That is what someone does when they are desperate to be heard. You are gambling your life on that theory. It is not a gamble. It is a reading of the evidence. Your generals were too angry to see it. But the Rethkai left a message in what they did not do. They did not kill. In a galaxy where killing is easy, choosing not to kill is the loudest statement anyone can make. Aethera released his arm. She stared at him, this small man who saw patterns in the spaces between violence, who read meaning in the silences that others filled with rage. I am coming with you, she said. No, Cole said firmly. I need you here. Your mother will try to launch a strike while I am gone. You are the only person in this palace who can slow her down. I am her least important daughter. I have no power. You have more power than you think. You have been invisible your whole life, and that means you know things about this court that no one realizes you know. Use it. Cole, this is insane. His were small and warm, and hers were cool and twice the size of his, but they fit together in a way that neither of them could explain. I need you to trust me, he said. Can you do that? Aethera looked into his eyes, dark, steady, and impossibly calm. She thought about the guard Drothen, who was now kind to the servants. She thought about Lady Sevara, who had wept in open court. She thought about the way the eastern wing of the palace had slowly, quietly become the warmest place in a cold empire. Yes, she said, I trust you. Cole smiled. It was the same easy, open smile he had given her the first day they met on Kethara 9, and it still did something to her chest that she could not name. He left the next morning on a small diplomatic shuttle. Aethera watched it disappear into the sky from the palace balcony, and then she turned around and went to work. She had never played politics before. She had spent her entire life avoiding it, keeping her head down, surviving by being unremarkable. But Cole had told her she had power, and for the first time, she believed it. She started with the moderates. Every court had them, the officials who privately doubted the current course, but were too afraid to speak up. Aethera found them one by one. She sat with them in private chambers and garden alcoves and quiet corners of the library. She did not threaten or manipulate. She did something she had learned from watching Cole. She listened, and one by one they began to listen back. Within a week, Aethera had assembled a quiet coalition of 13 court officials, 2 minor generals, and a senior intelligence analyst. It was not enough to challenge Nythera directly, but it was enough to slow things down. Enough to delay a military strike. Enough to buy Cole the time he needed. As she worked, Aethera could not stop thinking about something Drothan the guard had said when she asked him about his conversation with Cole. It was like he could see inside me, Drothan had told her. Not my thoughts, my reasons, the real reasons I was the way I was. And once I saw them through his eyes, I could not look away. Aethera wondered what Cole would see if he looked inside her. She wondered if she was ready to find out. And somewhere in the dark space between empires, a small shuttle carrying one human man flew toward the most dangerous border in the galaxy, armed with nothing but a thermos of coffee and the stubborn belief that listening was stronger than any weapon ever built. Cole's shuttle reached the Rethkai border after 4 days of travel through empty space. The silence out there was enormous. No stations, no traffic, no signals. Just the cold dark between 2 empires that had spent centuries trying to destroy each other. He sat in the cockpit with his Vialethi pilot, a quiet young officer named Salith, who had volunteered for the mission mostly because nobody else would. Salith kept glancing at Cole as if expecting him to panic. Cole was reading his paperback book. "You are not afraid," Salith said. It was not a question. "I am very afraid," Cole said, without looking up from his page. "But fear and panic are 2 different things. Fear keeps you sharp. Panic makes you stupid." Salith thought about that for a while, and said nothing more. When they reached the border coordinates, Cole opened a communication channel and sent a message on every frequency he could find. It was simple and direct. "My name is Cole Hadley. I'm a human, married to a daughter of the Vialethi Dominion. I do not speak for the Dominion. I do not speak for Earth. I speak only for myself. I would like to talk." Nothing happened for 12 hours. Salith grew more nervous with each passing minute. Cole made coffee from his thermos, offered some to the pilot, and waited. Then a ship appeared. It came out of the darkness like a shadow given form, a sleek vessel of black metal that was twice the size of their shuttle and moved with a predatory grace that made Salith's hands tighten on the controls. It did not hail them. It did not threaten them. It simply transmitted a set of coordinates and then turned and glided back into the dark. The coordinates led to a barren moon on the edge of the neutral zone. It was a dead gray rock, with no atmosphere, no water, and no strategic value. A meeting place chosen specifically because it mattered to no one. Cole put on an environment suit and walked out alone. The Rethkai delegation was waiting inside a pressurized dome they had set up on the surface. There were 6 of them, tall insectoid beings with bodies covered in iridescent shell that shifted color depending on their emotions. Their leader was a commander named Vorath, whose shell was currently the color of rust, which Cole would later learn meant deep suspicion. "You are the Witnesse pet," Vorath said through a translation device mounted on his chest. "I am a human," Cole said, "and I am nobody's pet." "Then why are you here?" "Because you evacuated 3 stations before you destroyed them. You moved thousands of Witnesse personnel to safety before firing a single shot. That took planning. That took effort. And I want to understand why you made that choice." Vorath's shell color shifted from rust to a mottled blue-gray. Surprise! None of the Witnesse had acknowledged what the Rethkai had done. None of them had even noticed. And here was this tiny creature from a species they had barely heard of, and he had seen it immediately. "Sit," Vorath said. Cole sat. What happened over the next 3 days became one of the most important events in galactic history, though no one realized it at the time. Cole listened. He listened to Vorath describe the Rethkai's history with the Dominion. 300 years of invasion, occupation, and destruction. He listened to a soldier named Kithrin talk about the colony where she had grown up, a beautiful world of crystal forests that the Witnesse had burned to glass during their second expansion campaign. She still dreamed about the sound the trees made as they melted. He listened to an elderly diplomat named Orath, who had spent 60 years trying to negotiate with the Witnesse, and had been ignored, insulted, and dismissed every single time. Orath's shell was permanently dull, a sign of emotional exhaustion that the Rethkai considered a kind of living death. He listened to stories of worlds lost, families scattered, cultures erased. He listened to grief so old and so deep that it had become the foundation of an entire civilization's identity. The Rethkai did not just remember their pain, they were built on it. It was the engine that drove their military, their politics, their entire way of life. And as Cole listened, something began to happen. The Rethkai felt it first. Kithrin, the soldier who had lost her world, was the one who named it. She was telling Cole about her childhood, about the crystal forests, and the way they caught the light of the triple suns, when she suddenly stopped speaking and stared at him. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Listening," Cole said. "No, it is more than that. I can feel it. You are not just hearing my words. You are holding them. You are holding the weight of them." The room went very still. Vorath's shell shifted to a color none of the other Rethkai had seen before, a deep, luminous violet that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. "Dakavar," the old diplomat Orath whispered. The word came from the Rethkai's oldest language, from a spiritual tradition that predated their civilization's rise to power. It described a mythical ability, the capacity to bridge the gap between souls, not through telepathy or mind control, but through pure empathy. The ability to hold another being's pain without flinching, without judging, without trying to fix it. Simply to be present with it, to bear witness. The Rethkai had believed Dakavar was a legend, a beautiful story told to children about a power that had never existed and never could. No living being could truly feel what another felt. The boundaries between minds were absolute. Except that Cole Hadley was doing it. Sitting on a dead moon in a pressurized dome, a small human man from a small town on a small planet was doing something that an ancient galactic civilization had dismissed as myth. He was not reading their minds. He could not hear their thoughts or see their memories. But when someone spoke to him about their pain, he received it fully. He took it in and held it without being destroyed by it, and the speaker could feel that happening. They could feel their burden being shared for the first time, not taken away, but acknowledged, witnessed, honored. It changed them. Not in dramatic ways. Nobody was suddenly healed or transformed. But the relief of being truly heard after centuries of silence was like water in a desert. It cracked open something that had been sealed shut for so long that they had forgotten it was there. By the third day, the dome on the barren moon felt like a different place. The rigid formality of the first meeting had dissolved. HFY soldiers sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing ration packs with Cole, and telling stories that they had never told anyone outside their own species. Vorath, the stern commander who had called Cole a pet, was sitting next to him, showing him images of his homeworld on a personal data screen. "Your world is beautiful," Cole said, looking at a picture of vast shimmering plains beneath 3 red suns. "It was," Vorath said quietly, "before the Vilethi burned the southern continent." And he meant it in a way that Vorath could feel down to the core of his being. Cole sent a message to Aethera on the 5th day. It read, "They want to talk, really talk, but not to generals. Send someone who can feel." Aethera came herself. When she arrived at the dome, she found her husband sitting in a circle of HFY, sharing a meal and laughing at something Kithrin had said. The scene was so impossible, so utterly contrary to everything she had been taught about the HFY, that she stood in the airlock for a full minute, unable to move. Vorath rose when he saw her. His shell shifted to a wary amber, but he did not reach for a weapon. He looked at Cole, then back at Aethera. "Your husband," Vorath said, "is the most dangerous being I have ever met." "Dangerous?" Aethera asked, stepping forward. "He makes it impossible to hate. And, for a people who have built their survival on hatred, that is the most frightening thing in the galaxy." Aethera looked at Cole. He was sitting on the floor of a dome on a dead moon, holding a cup of terrible ration coffee, surrounded by beings who had been his species' enemies since before humans left their home planet. And he was smiling that same easy, open smile. She sat down next to him, and together they got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, Aethera and Vorath hammered out the framework of something that had never existed before. A direct channel of communication between the Vilethi and the HFY that bypassed military command on both sides. It was unofficial, unauthorized, and fragile. One wrong word could shatter it. But it was real, and it held. Cole was the bridge. Whenever the negotiations stalled, whenever old anger flared and voices rose, Cole would lean forward and say something quiet. Sometimes it was a question. Sometimes it was an observation. Sometimes he just said someone's name in a way that reminded them they were a person, before they were a soldier or a diplomat, or a representative of centuries of pain. Every time it worked. Every time the anger cooled and the talking resumed. When they returned to Valith Prime, they brought with them something that had not existed in 300 years. A ceasefire proposal from the HFY Federation. It was not addressed to the Dominion or to Nythara. It was addressed to Cole Hadley. The court did not know what to do with that. Neither did the Empress. And for the first time in 200 years, the most powerful being in the galaxy looked at a small human man from Vermont and realized she had no idea what she was dealing with. The ceasefire held for 2 months. In galactic terms, that was a miracle. In the Vilethi court, it was a crisis. General Kethvora was the loudest voice against the peace. He was old, scarred from a dozen campaigns, and he believed in the Dominion's way of doing things, with a devotion that bordered on religion. To him, talking to the HFY was not just a mistake. It was an insult to every soldier who had ever died fighting them. It was weakness. And weakness in Kethvora's world was worse than death. He spent those 2 months building support among the hardliners. He held private meetings in the lower levels of the palace. Far from the intelligence officers, Aethera had quietly turned to her side. He whispered to ambitious young commanders about glory and honor and the old ways. He reminded them that the Dominion had been built by blood, not by conversation. And when he had enough support, he acted. A small fleet of Vilethi warships, crewed by soldiers loyal to Kethvora, dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly on top of a Rethkai diplomatic convoy. The convoy was carrying negotiators, who had been traveling to a planned meeting with Aethera's team to discuss the next phase of the ceasefire talks. The attack lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, 37 Rethkai were dead. Among them were 2 of the negotiators Cole had sat with on the barren moon. One of them was the old diplomat Orath, whose dull shell had briefly regained its color during those 3 days of talking. The news hit the palace like a bomb. Aethera found out from one of her intelligence contacts and went immediately to find Cole. She found him in their quarters, standing by the window, his face completely still. "Cole," she said. "I heard," he said. His voice was flat, empty. She had never heard it sound like that before. "Kethvora has been arrested. My mother's guard took him within the hour. She did not authorize the attack." "It does not matter," Cole said. "The Rethkai will not care who authorized it. Their people are dead. Orath is dead." He turned from the window, and Aethera saw something she had never seen in Cole Hadley's eyes. Pain. Not the quiet, contained kind that he carried with such grace. This was raw and open and terrible. "I told him he was heard," Cole said. "I sat with him, and I told him that his 60 years of trying had not been wasted. I told him things were going to be different. Cole, I promised him, Aethera." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. He was so small against her, this man who carried the weight of civilizations. She held him and felt him shake, and she understood for the first time the cost of what he did. Every person Cole listened to left a mark on him. Every pain he held became part of him. He did not just witness suffering. He absorbed it. And the death of someone he had connected with cut him in a way that nothing else could. The Rethkai response was swift. Vorath's message arrived within hours. The fleet was mobilizing. The ceasefire was dead. War was coming, and this time the Rethkai would not bother evacuating anything. Nithara retreated into cold silence. She had not wanted this. She had been willing, grudgingly, to let the ceasefire experiment play out. But now her hand was forced. If the Rethkai attacked, the Dominion would respond. The cycle would begin again. Cole asked for one chance, one meeting with Vorath before the fleet crossed the border. Nithara looked at him for a long time. Her expression was impossible to read. Then she said, "You have 3 days." "I'm going with him," Aethera said. Her mother's eyes moved to her. "You were not asked." "I am not asking permission." Something shifted in Nithara's gaze. It was so small and so brief that anyone else would have missed it. But Aethera had spent her life reading her mother's face, and she caught it. It was respect. They flew to the barren moon for the second time. The dome was still there. The ration packs were still piled in the corner. But the warmth was gone. When Vorath entered, his shell was a deep, burning red. The color of rage, the color of war. Behind him came the families, wives and children and parents of the 37 who had been killed. They stood in a silent row, their shells muted with grief, their compound eyes dark and hollow. "Your peace killed my people," Vorath said. "Kethvora killed your people," Cole said. "Not peace. The result is the same. They trusted, they came to talk, and they died for it." Cole looked at the families. He looked at each face, each pair of hollow eyes, each dulled and grieving shell. He looked at the children, small insectoid beings who clung to their parents and did not understand why the people they loved were not coming home. Then Cole Hadley did something that no diplomat in the galaxy's long and bloody history had ever done. He knelt. Not a diplomatic gesture, not a calculated move. He went to his knees on the cold floor of the dome and placed both hands flat on the ground in front of him. Palms down, fingers spread. It was the Rethkai gesture of deepest mourning, a pose reserved for the most profound expressions of grief. It was something that outsiders never performed, because to do so without genuine feeling was considered the worst kind of insult. Cole was not performing. The grief that poured out of him was so real, so raw, that every being in the dome felt it like a physical force. It was the full weight of every conversation he had ever had with Orath, every story the old diplomat had told him, every moment of connection between a tired human and a tired Rethkai, who had both spent their lives trying to convince others that talking was better than fighting. Aethera watched him, and then she knelt beside him. She did not know the Rethkai mourning gesture. She did not know if she was doing it correctly, but she placed her hands on the ground next to Cole's and let herself feel what he felt. It nearly broke her. The wave of grief and guilt and sorrow that Cole carried was staggering. She understood now why he had been shaking in their quarters. This was what he lived with. This was the price of Dakivar, of radical empathy, of choosing to hold other people's pain as your own. It was not a gift. It was a wound that never healed, because he kept choosing to open it for the sake of others. But she held on, and together they knelt before the Rethkai families and mourned. The dome was silent for a long time. Then one of the children moved. A small Rethkai, barely waist-high, with a shell that was pale and almost translucent with youth. The child walked across the dome on unsteady legs, reached out, and placed one small hand on the top of Cole's bowed head. In Rethkai culture, that gesture meant forgiveness. Not the forgetting kind, not the pretending it did not happen kind. The real kind. The kind that says, I see your pain, and I know it is real, and I choose to move forward with you, instead of against you. One by one, the other families came forward. They touched Cole's head, then Aethera's. Some were crying, a sound like wind chimes breaking. Some were silent, but every single one of them made the choice. Vorath was the last. He stood over Cole for a long time, his shell cycling through colors that had no names in any translation database. Then he placed both hands on Cole's shoulders and said one word, Dakivar. Cole lifted his head. His face was wet with tears. He looked up at Vorath and said, I am sorry I could not save them. You cannot save everyone, Vorath said, but you can make sure they are remembered. That is enough. That has always been enough. The ceasefire was restored that day, not because of politics or strategy or military calculations. It was restored because a human man knelt on a cold floor and showed a grieving people that their pain mattered, that they mattered. The years that followed were hard. Change does not come easily, not for individuals, and certainly not for civilizations that have spent centuries locked in patterns of violence and fear. But the channel Cole had opened between the Velithi and the Rethkai survived. Other species joined, drawn by the impossible rumor that there existed a place where you could speak and actually be heard. Humans became the galaxy's mediators, not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because they possessed something no other species had developed to the same degree: the ability to sit with someone else's pain and not run away from it. It was not magic. It was not a superpower. It was just the result of a messy, contradictory species spending thousands of years hurting each other, and slowly, painfully learning that connection was the only thing that actually healed. Cole and Aethera stayed on Valeth Prime. Their quarters were moved closer to the center of the palace, which, in the Dominion, was the highest honor a non-Valethi had ever received. Nithara never said she was proud of her daughter. She did not have the vocabulary for it. But she stopped calling Aethera expendable, and that was enough. One evening, years after the crisis, Aethera found Cole on the balcony. He was looking at the stars, the same way he had been the first night she found him at the window. She stood beside him and followed his gaze. "Do you ever think about home?" she asked. "Sometimes," Cole said. "I miss the river, and the leaves in autumn, and maple syrup. We could visit." "We could." He put his arm around her waist. She had to lean down for it to work, and it looked as ridiculous as it always did, and neither of them cared. "But right now, I am where I need to be." "You changed the galaxy, Cole." He shook his head. "I just listened. The galaxy changed itself." It was a real smile, the kind that used her whole face, the kind that the cold, frightened princess who had walked into an embassy lounge on Kethera 9 would never have believed she was capable of. "Liar," she said softly. Cole laughed. It echoed across the balcony and out into the night sky, warm and human and full of life. Above them, the twin moons of Veilith hung in the darkness like two pale eyes, watching over a galaxy that was slowly, imperfectly, painfully learning to do the hardest thing in the universe. To listen. To really, truly listen. And somewhere on a barren moon at the edge of two empires, a small dome still stood on the gray surface, empty now, but not forgotten. The ration packs were gone, and the chairs had been cleared away. But if you stood inside and were very still, you could almost feel it. The echo of a moment when a small man from a small town had knelt on a cold floor and shown the galaxy that the most powerful force in the universe was not a weapon, or a fleet, or an empire. It was the simple, terrifying, world-shaking act of giving a damn. The war between Earth and the Veilithi Dominion had lasted 18 months, and humanity was losing. The Veilithi had ships that could crack a planet open like an egg. They had soldiers that stood 8 feet tall, with skin the color of storm clouds, and eyes that glowed like burning coals. They had conquered half the galaxy, and Earth was supposed to be just another easy meal. But humans did not go down easy. They fought in ways the Veilithi had never seen before. They hid in asteroid fields and launched surprise attacks. They sent fake signals to confuse Veilithi scanners. They rigged their own damaged ships to explode when the enemy came to inspect them. For every human ship destroyed, the Veilithi paid a price they had not expected. High Sovereign Nithara, the Empress who ruled the Dominion from her throne of black glass, grew tired of it. Humans were not worth this much trouble, so she offered a deal. One of her daughters would be bonded to a human male, and in return, humanity would accept its place beneath the Dominion's boot. It was not a real partnership. It was a leash dressed up in ceremony. Earth's United Council had no choice. They could accept the deal or watch their species burn. So they said yes, and they began looking for someone to send. They chose Cole Hadley. Cole was 34 years old. He came from a small town in Vermont, where the biggest excitement was the annual Maple Syrup Festival. He had no military training. He had never fired a weapon. He had spent his whole career sitting in rooms with angry people and helping them find common ground. He negotiated water rights, land disputes, and once talked 2 neighboring towns out of a feud that had lasted 40 years over a broken fence. When the council asked him to marry an alien princess and live on a hostile world to save humanity, Cole thought about it for exactly 1 day. Then he packed a single bag, put a photograph of the Green Mountains in the side pocket, and said yes. The Veilithi princess chosen for the marriage was Aethera Nevaelith. She was the youngest of 7 daughters, and her mother considered her the weakest. Aethera was tall, even by Veilithi standards, with pale violet skin and sharp features that could have been carved from marble. She was intelligent, well-read, and had a habit of asking questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. In the Dominion, those were not qualities that kept you alive. Her mother chose her for the marriage because she was expendable. If the arrangement failed, losing Aethera would cost nothing. If it succeeded, Nithara would take the credit. Either way, the Empress won. Aethera arrived at the neutral station of Cathara 9, expecting to meet a monster. Every report she had read about humans described them as violent, irrational, and dangerously unpredictable. She walked into the embassy lounge, ready for a confrontation. She found Cole sitting in a chair by the window, reading a worn paperback book and drinking coffee from a silver thermos. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into an easy, honest smile. "Hi," he said. "You must be Aethera. I'm Cole. Do you want some coffee?" She did not know what coffee was. She told him so. "That's okay," he said. "It's an acquired taste. Took me 20 years to like it, and I grew up with it." Aethera sat down across from him and studied his face. He was small by her standards. His skin was a warm brown, his hair was dark and slightly messy, and his eyes were the color of river stones. There was nothing threatening about him. He looked like the kind of person you would find feeding birds in a park. "You are not what I expected," she said. "I get that a lot," Cole replied. The bonding ceremony was held on Valith Prime, 3 days later. It was a grand, brutal affair. The Viality did not believe in gentle rituals. The ceremony involved oaths spoken in a language Cole could barely pronounce, a blade drawn across both their palms so their blood could mix on a stone altar, and 4 hours of standing under blinding ceremonial lights, while thousands of Viality watched from tiered galleries. Cole stood through all of it, without flinching. When the blade cut his palm, he did not make a sound. When the blood dripped onto the altar and the crowd roared, he simply looked at Aethera and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "We are in this together." She did not know what to do with that. They were given quarters in the eastern wing of the Imperial Palace, far from the throne room and the corridors of power. It was a deliberate insult, placing them in the section reserved for minor officials and visiting dignitaries of conquered species. "You are not important." Cole did not seem to care. He unpacked his bag, set his photograph on the bedside table, and spent 10 minutes figuring out how the alien shower worked. Then he came out, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at Aethera. "So," he said, "tell me about yourself." "What do you want to know?" she asked, suspicious. "Anything. Everything. What do you like? What do you hate? What keeps you up at night?" No one had ever asked Aethera those questions. In the Dominion, you did not share your fears or your joys. You kept them hidden, because anything revealed could be used against you. She opened her mouth to give a diplomatic non-answer, the kind she had been trained to deliver since childhood. Instead, she said, "I hate this palace." The words came out before she could stop them. She stiffened, waiting for Cole to use the admission against her. He did not. He just nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "it's pretty cold in here. And I don't mean the temperature." Aethera felt something crack inside her chest. It was small, barely noticeable, like a hairline fracture in glass, but it was there. Over the next few weeks, Cole settled into life on Valith Prime with a patience that amazed her. He learned the Valathi language quickly, though his accent was terrible and made the servants laugh behind their hands. He attended court functions at Aethera's side, enduring the sneers and whispered insults of nobles who called him the pet and the animal. He never reacted. He just smiled and kept being polite. "Does it not bother you?" Aethera asked him one evening, "the way they treat you?" "Of course it bothers me," Cole said. "But getting angry at someone who is trying to make you angry just gives them what they want. I would rather confuse them." "Confuse them?" "Yeah. Nothing throws a bully off balance like being kind to them. They have no idea what to do with it." Aethera watched him at the next court gathering, and saw that he was right. When a senior general mocked him publicly, Cole responded by complimenting the general's ceremonial armor. The general sputtered, turned red, and walked away. 2 courtiers who had been watching burst out laughing, then quickly composed themselves. Cole caught Aethera's eye across the room and winked. She felt that crack in her chest widen just a little more. Something was happening to Aethera Nyvalith. She was beginning to like her husband. Not just tolerate him. Not just respect his usefulness. She was beginning to look forward to their evening meals, when he would tell her stories about Earth, about his small town, and the river that ran through it, and the way the leaves changed color in autumn. She was beginning to notice the way he listened when she spoke. Really listened, with his whole body turned toward her, and his eyes focused and warm. She was beginning to feel safe. It was a feeling she had not experienced since she was a child, and it terrified her. One night, 3 weeks into their marriage, Aethera woke to find Cole standing at the window of their quarters, looking out at the alien skyline. The twin moons of Valith hung low and heavy in the sky, casting everything in pale blue light. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Thinking," he said. "About what?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "About how big the galaxy is, and how small the things are that keep people apart." Aethera got out of bed and stood beside him. She was a full foot taller than him, and in the moonlight, the difference was almost comical. A towering Valithi warrior princess and a small, soft human man from a town no one had ever heard of. "Do you really think this can work?" she asked. "This marriage? This peace?" Cole looked up at her. "I think anything can work if the people involved decide it matters enough to try. And if they do not decide that, then we make them want to," he said, one conversation at a time. Aethera did not fully believe him, but standing there in the moonlight, with this strange, small, impossibly calm man beside her, she wanted to. And wanting to believe, she was beginning to learn, was the first step towards something real. She did not go back to bed. She stayed at the window with Cole, watching the moons move across the sky, and for the first time in her life, the palace did not feel quite so cold.